And I do want to get to what's next in a moment, because I know you've got some very constructive ideas on what we should do. Yes. But just to pick up on something, in the Karma Langton report, it's page 169, this statement in it that says the National Voice should not be able to obstruct or delay government or parliament. Mechanisms should not create burdensome or bureaucratic compliance processes. That was in the Karma Langton report. It seems that the end result, this proposed amendment, went well beyond what had been suggested in that initial analysis.
By including executive government, we had a gargantuan leap, Kieran. What was in Karma Langton, and I was on the Karma Langton committee, I was there for 2 years, everyone was on the same page that basically what it was about was a voice to Parliament and to government in relation to laws and policies. But by the words that were adopted at Karma and which were then put forward by government, it was not only to include those sorts of things, but also administrative decisions made by 250,000 public servants. That was going to set up a whole new bureaucracy. That was never envisaged by Karma Langton. In fact, we specified in Karma Langton that the Voice wouldn't even deal with what was called delegated legislation because there were 1,000 pieces of such legislation a year. Well, God help us, there'd be 1,000 administrative decisions by public servants every week. So it was an enormous overreach, and once there was no willingness to tailor it back more consistent with Karma Langton, then obviously we were in very deep trouble.
And Father Frank, I was interested to read your analysis in the wake of the referendum wipeout in The Australian at the weekend, where basically you said that constitutional recognition is lost for a generation. And if I can just paraphrase, you believe governments now need to empower some of the existing bodies, including the National Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation. They need to be empowered and listened to now.
Absolutely, because what we've got is a situation, I think there's goodwill and there's general agreement in the community and on both sides of the political aisle in Canberra that something more has to be done to close the gap, particularly on those ghastly health statistics. Well, guess what? We've got a coalition of peaks, and there was an agreement which was negotiated with the Morrison government with that coalition of peaks, about which we've heard next to nothing while the referendum's been playing out. So let's get that coalition of peaks working properly. And in terms of health issues, you've got an enormous operation there with NACCHO, which represents all the community-based Aboriginal health organisations, all 145 of them. They've got splendid offices there in Constitution Avenue in Canberra. They're headed up by a very competent Aboriginal civil servant there in Patricia Turner. And why isn't it that they're not being listened to more closely? I mean, during the referendum campaign, we had the Minister of Health out there even writing an article saying he needs to listen to a voice, but there was no mention of NACCHO or the Coalition of Peaks. So now that the referendum is behind us, I think there's a need for the real work to be done so that NACCHO can be assured that they are right there at the table with the parliamentary processes and with the Minister, and that the Coalition of Peaks is now taken seriously, even though it was a creation at the time of the Morrison government. Let's get past the party politics and let's start doing something constructive in order to close those gaps.
Yep, and Father Frank, I know that your view was that some in the debate saw you as a bit of an old fogey with antiquated ideas, but
sure.
Unfortunately they didn't listen to you, and as that famous saying goes, if we don't learn from history, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes.
We are, and I think that what's happened is they played roulette with the country's soul. We're way back, look at that letter that's come out from the Aboriginal leaders today. The anger, the disappointment, the despair, these are the people we've got to be able to work with well and constructively and in trust in order to close those gaps. And so much of what Noel Pearson detected as love in the air during the last week or two of the campaign, that's evaporated. Why? Because basically Australians have voted as they've always voted in referendums. They've basically said that we need to be sure that either there is a crisis or that there is consensus among our politicians. And the great tragedy of this, Kieran, is that in the end, all you've got to do is listen to people at the family barbecue nowadays. I mean, those who blame Albanese are those who are the Tory voters. Those who blame Dutton are those who are the Labor voters. And that sort of partisanship should never come into a referendum. Once it does, the referendum is lost completely.
Father Frank Brennan, it's great to get your insights today, and right throughout this debate. We'll stay in touch. I appreciate it.
We will, but I fear it'll be another generation before it happens, so probably not in my lifetime, Kieran. I hope it's in yours.